Okay, we'll call our meeting order, begin with the superintendent's report.
Well, thank you, Skip. Welcome to everyone here tonight in the audience, and I'd like to say welcome to those watching the live stream this evening. Before we get started, just would like to take a quick minute again to thank all of our wonderful VCS retirees and thank them for their years of service to our students and families of Vicksburg Community Schools. I'd like to wish all those retirees the best in their retirement. That was a great little banquet we had there. Also like to take a minute to thank our hardworking and dedicated VCS staff for making this school year so successful. We are so fortunate to have so many talented individuals helping to shape the future of our precious students. And I hope our staff has a great summer break with plenty of relaxation and family time. Also, just as always, want to thank our families for their support. During 5th grade graduations, I was thanking the families. It's amazing how much support we get, especially like when we talk about fundraisers. How much, for example, at the elementary level, how much money is brought in every single year to help support our students. It's just fantastic, so thank you, families. We have a special recognition this evening, and with that, I'm going to turn it over to Principal Mike Barwigan.
Good evening. One of the things that we made as one of our goals this year, the next couple of years, has been attendance. And that's been a national problem, not just Toby's problem. And so when we sat down and started talking about it, we wanted to bring back the positive side of it because we've been dealing with the poor attendance and the negative side of it. But let's start recognizing good attendance again. And so we started doing that at Toby. And every so often in our Toby communities, was every month we recognized perfect attendance for that month. And a handful or a little bit more than that, some months the kids would get called up front. And I started to notice one student who was getting called up every month, right? And so in February, I ran off for perfect attendance for the year and we had one. And so I met her in the hallway and I said, Claire, you can't miss the rest of the year. I said, you need a perfect attendance student. And
Was he nice when he said it? Just check.
I was not, until it got closer, then I was like, do not miss. That's true, isn't it? And so we went through the entire year, and we haven't had one. I went back and looked, and we have not had a perfect attendance in 8 years, so it's pre-pandemic, and so it's quite an accomplishment. And so with that said, let's welcome our perfect attendance student, Miss Claire Grubbs, a 3rd grader. She's not only there every day, she does everything right. She's a great student. And our hopes is that we can get her up front next year and at the beginning and have her challenge everybody else so we can have more perfect attendance students because that's so important. So thank you, great job.
That's so awesome.
And they can also take some coffee.
Thank you, Mike. Pretty quiet updates tonight regarding Lansing. It, again, remains fairly quiet on the educational front. We're all anxiously awaiting the budget, and we're looking forward to Steve's presentation tonight. But again, we're looking forward to getting the final budget numbers, and hopefully those will come in sooner than later. But looking forward to Steve as he presents on the 24-25 budget as well this evening. Also, just wanted to let the board know in your packet you will find the proposed Board of Education dates for the 24-25 school year. If you have any questions, make sure you reach out to Amy. Those will be up for approval at our July organizational meeting. And I just wanted to send out a big reminder, very important reminder. With all the celebrations we've been doing, we have one left, and that's Wednesday night, Vicksburg Pathways High School graduation in the PAC, so June 12th, Wednesday at 6 p.m. As you know, we've started construction, so once you park, make sure you follow the balloons and signs so that you can get into the appropriate entrances so you can get into the PAC. Really looking forward to that final celebration of the school year. And also, just a reminder, we have started summer school. So we kicked off with the high school today, and elementary will get started next week. And with that, Skip, that's my report.
Okay, thank you, Keegan. We'll go on to reports and public inquiry, serving line new bid recommendations. Sarah?
So in your packet, you will see that we took bids for new serving lines at each building. I know a couple months ago you guys approved a serving line at 3 of the buildings, but we did go back and make some changes, and then we also added 2 additional buildings. So this is one bid for all 5 buildings, and it's my recommendation that we take the low bid from Douglas Equipment for just shy of $300,000.
Sarah, can you just give us a couple quick snippets of what those serving lines will look like, or
Yeah,
what's
so
the new?
For instance, at Sunset, theirs is actually just a prep counter that they use. There's no tray for the students to slide their trays on once they get the food, so we do have some extra spills because of that. So we'll be adding that. We'll be adding a hot plate and a cold plate at each end so that the food will stay warmer, more room at temperature for students to eat. Also making some fun upgrades, you know, at the high school, getting a bar line that is actually meant to do what it's supposed to do. Right now, we're kind of makeshifting old equipment, so it'll be kind of nice to update it.
Thank you.
Cool.
Any other questions?
Well, what you went from 3 to 5?
Yep.
Was, why did you make that change?
Why? We still have what we call excess funds, which is from the state of Michigan. So we have come up with a plan on how to spend that down.
Right.
And even after doing all 3, we still had more money that we were required to spend. So this helped us get to the end of that excess fund balance.
Right. And then, those additional 2 buildings are going, you feel like that's an upgrade that they're going to get as well?
Oh yeah, they're brand new serving lines at all 5 buildings.
Awesome.
Any other questions?
Thanks, Sarah. Budget and finance report, Steve?
All right, what I'd like to do is start with the normal budget progress report. I'll make a few comments there. I'll cover the investment portfolio update, and then I'll move up to the front of the boardroom, connect, and then project onto the screen. So with that, I'll start with the monthly budget progress report, and this includes activity through the end of May. And I'll just make a few comments on there. It includes the proposed June amendment, which I'll cover in a little bit more detail in a few minutes. But when I make comparisons, this is based on what I'm proposing for the amendment to the current year budget. All right, and so taking a look at that on the revenue side, year to date, total revenue $29,018,266, and based on revised projected figures, that is just shy of 75% of what we expect the year to date, or the final results for the year to end up. On the expenditure side, instructional expenditures year to date, just over $16.8 million, or just over 76% of the budget. Support services totaled $11,611,269. That's about 81.7% of the revised budget. Then there's a breakdown for athletics, community services, and interfund transfers. And you can see that on a year-to-date basis, we are at just under $29.7 million. out of 37.6 million of total expenditures projected, which is just shy of 79% of the year to date. I'll make a quick comment. If you look at figures for last year, you can see that we're running on a percentage basis and dollars, but looking at percentages, we are running ahead of schedule or ahead of where we were at this time last year. And there's really one fairly simple reason for that. In the current year, there were, we pay bi-weekly. So in 2 months out of the year, we have 3 pays. The rest of the time, there are 2 pays. And so May of '24, there were 3 payrolls. Last year, there were 2 in May. Now that'll flip-flop in June. Last year, there were 3 in June, and then this year, there will be 2 in June. So it's just a timing difference. When I exclude for that, we are, look like we are progressing pretty much right the way I would expect. All right?
Steve,
Yes.
we have talked a lot about when state aid comes, it's, sort of after the fact. We've already incurred expenses and we're waiting for that money to come and we run into that. But I just noticed for the first time that both last year and this year, for federal money, we're at like 9 and 10%, and here we are 11 months into the fiscal year.
Yeah.
Does that create a strain for you in terms of how you budget things, and is this an annual thing that federal money just takes forever to show up?
Well, there's a few things going with the federal, and a big part of it is there's always a delay in when final grant allocations are issued. And I mean, when was it this year, Gail? Do you remember off the top of your head for Title I, like our consolidated app?
When we can draw them down, or when we got the finals,
Just the finals.
like January.
Yeah, I mean, that's,
We still don't have next year's, we're supposed to be out May 1st.
that does create a challenge. Now, a bigger part of this, because we're still spending down federal COVID funds, there's a lot of complexity with those grants, and so those take longer. And I would say starting this week and then continuing, there's going to be a lot of emphasis on closing out the year, and part of that will be the COVID funds. So we are running behind on that. That doesn't cause any major, given our current financial status, that doesn't cause any major issues. And of course, as we transition away from the COVID funds, I expect our federal revenue to drop down to a lot more close to like a previous baseline, which might be $250,000 to $350,000 in the general fund. And then based on the timing of consolidated app and those kinds of things, that definitely, some of those things have to get finalized before we can draw those funds. Going forward, federal funds should be a smaller number, so it should be less of a factor.
Thank you.
All right? Yep. Second page of that report has expenditure data summarized by object code. And again, I think, and this is where you can kind of see, especially salaries and benefits, which comprise almost 82% of the overall budget, stood at $24.04 million, or 78.24%. And compared to last year, again, due to that timing difference, we were at about 75.6%. And to kind of put it into perspective in really round figures, if we excluding, fringe benefits like health insurance, vision, those types of things, and just look at benefits that are driven purely by payroll, like FICA or Medicare and Social Security, and also retirement. A typical payroll mid-year for us is going to be probably just in round figures, about 650,000, and then probably another 250 to 270 of FICA and retirement. So that little bit of timing difference can make a significant difference. All right. But salaries and benefits, $24.04 million, or 78.24% of the annual total. You can see there's breakdown there for purchase services, supplies, capital outlay, and other. So again, we're just under 79% year to date, just under 30 million or 29.7 million in expenditures. Are there questions on that? All right, moving on then. Next item is the investment report. second. I'll pull it up. Okay, investments as of May 31st. The major change here is that you'll now see the 2024 building and site fund, and those funds are invested. But just kind of starting at the top, as we've talked about repeatedly in recent months, the 2022 building and site fund continues to spend down. Those investments continue to mature, and we currently have reading glasses here. Just not quite $7,363,000 in the 2022 building and site fund. The 2024 building and site fund stands at $9,746,815. Of course, we have just started to spend resources out of that, but that's essentially money that came in on May 29th. That retirement, we have just over $1,057,000, and then general fund, at the end of May, we had just over $6.4 million. Interest rates continue to look great. We're doing well from an investment standpoint. We continue to wait and see when rates are going to start coming down, and it just seems like when you follow the market, that continues to kind of get pushed out, as employment data and inflationary data just doesn't quite support dropping interest rates yet, at least not from the Fed's perspective. So while we have those rates, we certainly will take advantage of them and earn everything that we can. All right, any questions there? All right, if not, then I'm going to take just a minute and get going with the budget presentation. All right. Anybody want to grab a last minute cup of coffee or anything?
We might need it.
All right.
If I see him dozing off, I'll let you know, Steve.
What's all
If I
right?
see him dozing off.
I just let them go, probably. All right, here we are. We're going to talk about the amendment to the current year general fund budget as well as next year, and we're going to conduct a budget hearing to support our non-homestead operating millage tax rate. So we're going to start by looking at the amendment to the current year and talk about some of the big things that changed. Then we're going to talk about next year and kind of some of the big changes there, as well as some of the uncertainty. There's a lot of information that we still don't know. All right, and then obviously we're going to talk about fund balance, answering questions that you guys have or attempt to, and we'll go from there. All right, so starting off, just looking at the current year revision. I've got a few things here. I've got, and kind of I can send this to you too, but however you want to do it is fine. So last year, just a quick recap. Last year, we ended the year with $36,769,547 of revenue and total expenditures of $34,891. So last year, we added a substantial amount to fund equity. We started the year at just under $6 million, and we ended the year at $7,874,000. Okay. Then fast forward to when we adopted last year's budget. Last year, a year ago, when we adopted the 23-24 budget, We expected right around 37 million in revenues, 36,272 for expenditures, and so at that time we expected to add 723,000 to fund equity. That would have taken fund equity to just under 8.6 million. Now, from where we sit today, a lot of things have changed. Like most years, we started last year without a school aid budget, so we had a lot of assumptions, and that process has just become a lot less predictable than it has been in the past, I would say. But we did see, the good news is significant revisions to both revenues and expenditures, and they netted out in a way that, at least in the short term, should continue to support a healthy amount of fund equity. We expect just over 1.8 million in increased revenues and 1.3 million in expenditures. And so based on that, we expect to end the year at 38.8 million in revenue, just under 37.6 on expenditures, and we expect to again add a substantial amount of fund equity, just over 1.2 million. At that point, that would, if that plays out exactly as I've laid it out, which of course it won't. These are, we know what last year's actual is, and we're getting a clearer sense of the current year, but we still have a lot of questions about next year. But we'll talk about those assumptions. But if this all played out the way it's laid out here, we'd end up with just under 9.1 million of fund equity. All right? Any questions on that? All right. So I'm going to just talk real quickly about how we went from, what kind of the major factors in the revision. And so again, we expected, and I just condense this down, make it a little bit clearer and easier to read. So the way this works is we started with a projection of just under 37 million. So now there's, we'll kind of go through some of the big changes. Local revenues are going to increase by about 244,000. And a big chunk of that is related to investment income. A year ago, we were, the talk was that, inflation was going to come down, unemployment was going to come up, things were going to kind of normalize in the economy, and rates would start to come down. Well, that really hasn't happened yet. Rates have been steady. And so, today, on our general fund investments, we're earning about 5.25%, which is pretty good. At this point, we're probably going to finish this year with 280 to 290,000 of investment income in the general fund. All right, so that's a substantial amount. There's also charges for services, which would be anything from kids club to gate receipts to rentals and that type of thing. And so there was just kind of a lot of, across all the local revenue accounts, there was just kind of a net increase. Biggest part of it, though, was related to investments. The foundation allowance. So last year, there were three, like we sit today, there were three proposals that were pretty broadly different. And so we had expected a higher foundation allowance. I want to say we had budgeted at 69, it might have been 7,000, I think we ended up at, got so many numbers going through my mind. We ended up a little bit below that. And so we ended up at, I'll come back to that. I don't remember the specific number, but we were also down in enrollment from what we projected. All right. So those two combined factors meant that from what we projected, state aid revenue came in about 332,000 less than we expected. Now, I talked about some of the unpredictability in the budgeting process. And you'll see that we've talked about it quite a bit. There's so many new categorical programs, and they come out, you're almost afraid to look at your email halfway through the year because you don't know what new categoricals are going to come out, that the guidance is still maybe unclear on how you can spend it, what you're supposed to do with it, but you find out about these things in October, November, December, June, it just kind of continues on. So that's been kind of crazy and a big challenge. However, in terms of increased categoricals, there was about 997,000. Now, a portion of it was section 147 or related to mixers, and so that has no net impact on our bottom line. It comes in and it goes out, so it's almost, we can assume almost any number you want as long as the revenue and the expenditure equal. So, and that's going to be a big assumption that we're going to talk about in next year's budget. But there was an increase in that. So you'll see an increase in both the revenues and expenditures related to mixers. All right. In addition, though, we saw a significant increase in 51A, or related to special ed funding, 31A, or at risk, 31N, which is for counseling support. We are using it for counseling support for students and that type of thing. There are also new categoricals totaling over $700,000. We had 22L, which is to assist large geographic districts with transportation costs, so we received that. 23G, which is,
Learning loss.
it's,
Yeah.
it's,
Summer school.
it's, that's a significant number, and again, some of that, we don't know if it's gonna be here next year or not, And then 27L, which is just, money that came in partly through the year for increased, educator compensation. So a lot of there are others on there, but those are kind of the, major ones. And, those are great, but they can be kind of challenging to kind of retool and, spend money the way it's intended and comply with all the regulations and that type of thing. But we saw that increase, and then inter-district revenues, primarily KRESA, we're talking mainly special education and career technical education, and the enhancement village. All right, so net revenues for those programs increased by about $116,000. All right, and then across all the revenue accounts, there's another $72,000 of just net effect of changes. All right, so total revenue we expect to go up by about 4.9%. All right, everybody following so far? All right, on the expenditure side. So we adopted last June, we expected not quite 36.3 million in total expenditures. So we were in the collective bargaining process at that time, and we did resolve the contract before school started, but it was after the budget was adopted. And just, I would say, salaries and wages went up by about $442,000. All right. Now, total salaries are, prior to that, 16.7, 16.8, and so that took us to 17.1, 17.2. So it's a big number. But 442, that's the net effect of all the collective bargaining changes, staffing changes, hiring, that type of thing. All right. And then health insurance went up by a significant amount. Health insurance went up by, I broke that out separately because on its own, that's a large enough item. That went up by about $370,000. All right. And so there's a couple things related to that. Through collective bargaining, we've increased what the district is picking up in terms of the total premium. Well, we've also had an increase in participation. So we have more people covered by the district's insurance, and the district picking up a bigger share of it. And so that added about $370,000. Now those two things in and of themselves are not bad. You might remember when we talked about strategic planning, one of the priorities was to make sure that we are, continue to be competitive and enhance our ability to attract and retain staff. And that's always a work in progress. But those were two things that I think made a significant difference for everybody, for the district and its staff. All right, so an increase in there. Other benefits went up net of $73,000, and that's going to be, if you look across all the benefits, there's going to be a variety of, there's workers' comp, FICA retirement, there's vision, dental, long-term disability, all those types of things. The net in all of those other benefits went up by $73,000. And then when I talked about mixers, the section 147, that went up by $239. So On the revenue side, we increased by 239,000. On the expenditure side, we increased by the same amount. So those two really kind of net out. And then non-compensation, there is a combination of factors that go into that. But it's supply, purchase services, capital outlay, those types of things. Of course, non-comp makes up, about, in very round figures, about 15% of the budget. So, those, it's the smallest part, but it still added 193,000. All right. So expenditures expected to go up by 3.6%. Make sense so far? Questions, comments? All right. So now, as we look ahead into 24-25, there's some big assumptions out there. And, I want to just point out that we still don't have a state budget. It might happen end of this week, next week. I mean, I think it certainly is feeling like we're going to see some movement before June 30th. But as of tonight, we have to make some guesses. All right? So, talk about enrollment. I've got a slide that talks about, that kind of shows our enrollment over time. But we expect to be down about 45. That would put us at 2,585. And I'll talk about that specifically in a few more slides. On the per pupil funding, I plugged in $225 per pupil. Now, the governor's proposal is a little bit less. The Senate and House are more. But this is kind of I feel like this is probably, hopefully, somewhat conservative, and hopefully will come in a little bit better than that. But for purposes of the initial go-around, I plugged in $225 per kid. All right? So then, we'll talk about what that looks like in a few minutes. But of course, we won't know our enrollment till October. Some of these things take some time. So we won't know, we'll have a sense for what our enrollment looks like, in the first week of school, but the count won't be finalized until, the first week of October. So I just like to point that out. Expenditures, expect about a $500,000 reduction in overall count, all right? Now that's not because we're looking at eliminating positions or asking for concessions or anything like that. That's right now, that section 147 funding accounts for about $3.1 million of revenue and expense. The governor's proposal takes some of that 147 money and reduces it. So I've estimated a reduction in our section 147 of, I want to say about 1.4 million, all right? And that has no bottom line impact. You're going to see that coming out of revenues and expenses. Now there's some differences in the different proposals, and I really think that retirement is going to be one of the wild cards in this, and we'll talk about that more in a little bit. So we do expect, if you exclude the 1.38 million for 147C, that still provides for about 860,000 of normal comp increases, and that would be step increases, health insurance increase, benefit costs, hiring, and just normal increases in salaries. All right. So we expect those to increase, but to be offset by that 147, and so we expect total or net count to come down by about $500,000. Supplies and purchase services expect to drop by about $570,000, and that's significantly related to, we'll talk about Vicksburg virtual and that program being shelved for the time being. And so when we talk about enrollment, that 45 is really related to that, and a big chunk of the purchase services would also be related to the contract side of that.
Steve?
Yes.
Why didn't you put the change in section 147C on the revenue side as well? I know it's much smaller.
Yeah, You know, it just doesn't show up. This is just kind of like some big picture things. I've got another slide that I think will demonstrate it, where you'll see it coming out on both sides.
Right, so it'll be 1.38 million for revenue and expenditure,
Yes.
correct?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Yes, but I will, yeah, I'll cover that in just a second. But yeah, I could have put that on there. Thanks for pointing that out. Let's see, and then we expect there to be an increase in capital outlay. So several months ago, the board approved a few major purchases, one being a group of school buses for about 1.1 million. We also authorized the purchase of 2 maintenance vehicles for 100,000. So the net increase in our planned capital outlay year over year is about 720,000. All right. So here, here's just a little bit different presentation. Dave, maybe this will clear that up. And this is, I don't know if this would be clear or helpful, but we'll just kind of go through it. So I just kind of show, all right, total projected revenues and expenditures amended for the 23-24 year. And then I kind of go down all the different changes. All right. Now, foundation revenue is expected to go up by 149,000, but that's a combination of the increase of $233 per kid, netted by a loss of 45 students. So the combination of those two factors results in a net increase in state aid of 149,000. All right. Categoricals, there are several categoricals that I didn't include on the expenditure side, but I have included on the revenue side. And so we expect some of those state categoricals to go away. Don't know for sure. You know, all 3 budget proposals are different, but I'm expecting that 23G, 27L, and a few other small ones, but totaling about 528,000 will not be in the budget next year. In addition, this is at 1.38 million. You see it coming out of both revenues and expenditures. All right. Compensation increases 856 on the expenditure side. Capital outlay 753,000 as an increase. I state that we expect our federal revenue to decline by 712,000 and other revenue adjustments of 121,000. So these the adjustments on the center column take you from current year projected expenditures of 38.8, and it results in a smaller budget next year, but still 36,454,000. All right.
Steve, what is non-compensation costs excluding capital outlay? That's a substantial number. What would that be?
So there's a big reduction in purchase services, and that's mainly related to that Vicksburg virtual.
Oh, okay.
Right.
Oh, okay.
So that's, supplies and purchase services, but I excluded capital outlay just because there's a big increase. I could have net it all together and it would have been a small number, but it doesn't really tell the whole
That's that
story.
lighthouse program?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Yep.
Got it.
All right, so yeah, we expect a substantial reduction there. Yeah, so now next year you'll see that as of today, we budgeted 36,454,000, and we budgeted more expenditures than that at 37,227,000. Now that's something that, I'm sure, causes red flags to go up, and it should. And it's something that we talk about, we have talked about with all the federal funding and the change in going off the federal funding. A lot of districts are running into difficulty because of how they budgeted and staffed up since then. All right. Now, what I would point out here is that even though we're going to show a reduction in fund equity, a majority of that is related to the increase in capital outlay. So, we're going to be spending about 1.1 million on vehicles. And that's not to say that's a one-time expenditure, but that's not, you know, part of your ongoing annual expenditures, all right? Now, we knew, you know, we do replace buses typically every 3 years. So I think to, you know, if I was gonna think about that in terms of what should it look like on a normal basis, or if we go back to the years where we bought a group of buses, like every 3 years, and then we did an installment purchase agreement, interest rates were close to 0, so we could do it at almost no borrowing cost, and then pay it off over 3 years. I would just kind of take that 1.1 million and, you know, assume that, you know, we're gonna have to be replacing, on average, a certain number of buses. You know, we need to be planning on probably 250, 300,000 a year. And so it's okay that it all happens, and from my perspective at least, it's okay that we do that in one fell swoop. But we can't do that every year, obviously. But I think because, you know, when you consider the capital outlay, I think we can still maintain essentially a structurally sound budget. All right? Other questions? Tina?
Do we replace the vans and the truck every 3 years? I mean, that truck was,
No, I'm talking, you know, so on average, what we've been replacing school buses. We've been kind of turning over the fleet. We try to do it about every 9 or 10 years. And so we, you know, ideally we replace roughly a third of the fleet, you know, every 3 years, and then that kind of gets you there. The other vehicles, you know, we don't replace those every some of those vehicles date back to the 90s. I mean, we probably, you know, I know we have additional needs. We're replacing 2 of the vehicles. We have other vehicles that are going to need to be replaced. We have box van that's getting pretty tired. We have the transit vans that we use for small groups. You know, all those things are going to have to be replaced. And so, but I think we can do that over time. And we, you know, when we buy, you know, maintenance vehicles, we kind of get at least 10 years out of them, if not more. So, all right.
thank you.
All right. So now I'm just going to kind of cover like kind of some high-level overview stuff. And some of this would be probably fairly familiar. If we just look at our revenues next year, you know, the local revenues, just under 3.5 million. State revenue, just under 29.5 million. Federal, you know, we've been over $1 million a year with federal for a while now. And so we expect that to drop back down to a much lower number, about 370,000. All right, and then other revenue of 3.1 million. So this kind of just breaks down. Now, one of the things that I just want to point out, the foundation allowance, I just like to present it a little bit differently because the foundation allowance, you know, accounts for 70% of our budgeted revenues, but it can get a little bit tricky. It's not all state aid, all right? The formula is essentially your student count multiplied by the foundation allowance. Then when the state determines what they're going to pay you, then it goes into dramatic amounts of complexity from there, but from a high level, that's essentially what it is. And then the state looks at your taxable value, and they make an assumption that you're going to levy the full 18 mills, and they deduct that, and the state pays the difference. All right. So the foundation allowance actually shows up in both our local revenues as well as our state revenues. And when we, let's see if I can find the cursor, it doesn't even show up on that screen. So when we talk about local revenue of not quite 3.5 million, the majority of that is a portion of the foundation allowance because it's money that we collect locally from the non-homestead operating millage, and that gets deducted from the state portion. So if state aid is 22.8 million, and then you see there's the total state revenue 29.5 million. The difference there is really when we're talking about all the different categoricals. It just adds up, and that the list gets longer and longer every year, it seems like. So. All right. expenditures by function, I'm sorry, yeah, expenditures by function. So basic, instruction, total instructional expenditures are going to be 57.1% of the budget. And then support services I've kind of grouped down like pupil support, instructional support, and building administration. Those are all close related to, what happens with students every day. That's another $6 million. General administration, or, superintendent's office and board, business office, and then central services, which would include technology, human resources, and district communications and that type of thing is another 2.4. And then facilities and transportation would be 6.2. Now that 6.2 is higher because we include the purchase of the buses and the trucks. All right. So then other athletics and community services, $1,380,000, and then interfund transfers would be indirect cost recovery from the food service fund to general fund, and that's expected to be right around $100,000. All right.
Have we seen facility costs from the general fund trend downward because of being able to do some things with our bond?
I mean, we've done some things that have added a lot of efficiency.
Right.
When we talk about windows and LED
Right.
lighting, but we've also added some costs in the form of air conditioning. So it's hard to say for sure, and that's one of the things that I know Dewey and I want to kind of get into and analyze. It's hard to say at this point. We haven't done the work to isolate, okay, how much of it is weather related and how much is market related, and how much of it is efficiency or inefficiency as a result of what we do every day and the improvements that we've made. All right. But our overall utility costs, they're a significant part of the budget. They have been, they continue to be, but they've been relatively stable. I mean, this year we came in a little better than expected. Gas and diesel prices were down. We had a milder winter, so.
But would it be fair to say that if we did not have that millage passed in the community that we budgeted over 6 years, that it is likely that we would have more expenses from our general fund to repair things that are starting to break?
Absolutely.
That kind of thing. So that really has helped our general fund to focus on instruction more
Absolutely.
and less on capital.
Yeah, and I think a big example of that would be the technology, because the bond has provided us with the vast majority of funds that we've used to upgrade and replace technology.
Right.
Yeah, which prior to 2020, that was all coming out of the general fund, and we were falling behind.
Right.
So
we can focus because of that, we can invest more in people.
yeah, and that's a good way of
Which is where the rubber hits the road with
Yep.
education.
And sometimes if you look at some of the ratios where we're at, I can look at other districts and get concerned that of the percentage or the relative share of the general fund that goes for compensation. But I think the thing that is different in our case is that we have this capital plan. We have had a steady flow of dollars for capital improvements, and so I think that's one of the things that you have to consider when you make those comparisons across districts.
Well, and I can remember 2 examples of where, if a boiler goes out, you have no choice.
Right.
You've got to find the money to pay for it, and that's going to come out of your general fund. And then the other, whatever the disaster was with the piping at the middle school many moons ago.
That was an example of something that came up and we had to address it, and it came out of the.
It comes out of the general fund.
Yep.
Those disasters happen. So
Yep.
keeping facilities upgraded to prevent those disasters.
For sure. All right, other questions or comments or observations? All right, so, and here's the expenditures summarized by object code. Again, substantial part of our budget, over 80%, is in the form of people. And you can see different, the blue slice are personnel costs. And then purchase services and supplies are green and yellow. Capital outlay, that's, at 3.7% is bigger than it typically is, but again, that's because we're making large purchase in 1 year. And then other is 0.4%. Those are payments between some districts or payment of fees and that type of thing, things that don't fall into the other object codes. Pretty limited, really. All right, questions, comments? All right, so then taking a look, going back to 22-23, looking at, we covered the 23-24 adopted and amended, and really this is just to kind of show fund balance at the end of each period. The only actual fund balance number there as of right now is the last year's ending or this year's beginning fund balance at $7,874,000. But we again expect to be right around 9.1 million at the end of this year, and then with that planned draw of fund balance next year, we would be at 8.3 million. All right. So now, I feel, I'll just say kind of editorial comment, I feel there's so many moving parts and so, with the federal government and those programs and kind of what, at least to me, it feels like mayhem at the state level. It's like categorical blizzard. It's just like whoever has an idea, it's crazy. There's just so many moving parts. I'm kind of transitioning from where we were with all this federal money to kind of a new normal going forward, a normal funding level. That creates a lot of anxiety and completely different set of circumstances, but, like hearing news about Ann Arbor, that's not a district where you expect to hear, that they have an unexpected shortfall of 25 million. So I feel pretty good, but there's still a lot of uncertainty. I'm going to talk a little bit more about fund balance and all that kind of stuff in just another slide or two. But as we do this, I want to switch gear a little bit. I guess, let me make a few quick comments. Looking at fund balance, each year's beginning fund balance as a percentage of that budget. It's been going up. Last year, at the end of last year, it would have been around 17.2%. Now we're around 21%. We expect to be around 24%. And that's good. I'm happy about that. That helps me to sleep a little bit better at night because we've got to maintain a stable ship. And I think, thanks to the board and thanks to Kevin and Gail, we've been able to do that. So, even though we were looking at a draw next year, that is, that's planned, and I feel like that is, that's nothing that should elicit panic. Now, I think before I go to that slide, I'd like to ask just by a show of hands, if you're going to guess between, say, 10 years ago and now, we have more kids, fewer kids? I'm talking like in-person K-12 instruction. Are we going up? Are we going, what does everybody think? All right, yeah, I'm impressed to hear people say that, because a lot of times we see houses going up and automatically assume, we're going to have to redistrict, we're going to have to build a new building, we're going to have to add on. And I think about the time that I've been here, in the early 2000s, it was Greenfield Point. It was getting built out. And then it was the Allen Edwin neighborhood off of 22nd. And now there's one off of Sprinkle. And these neighborhoods keep building and, spreading. And so you think, we're adding all these kids, but in reality, we're not. We're stable. But it's, you know, if we look at, there's a kind of a lot going on this graph, but, you know, it's kind of a stacked bar graph. The blue bars are traditional, everyday K-12 enrollment, would include special ed and all those kinds of programs, but just our in-person enrollment. And if you go back to, you know, 2009, these are the fall counts from each year. So 2009, that would be October 2009, all right? I mean, you go back, we were close to 2,600. Well, October 29, or 2009, we were at 2,594. And then in the meantime, we've done a few different things. We've had this kind of purple color is what started off as the WAY program and became Pathways. That has certainly provided great service to our students, but it's also been beneficial for the district as a whole. And then we did the virtual shared time program, and that became very, compliance with the pupil accounting became overly complex, and there have been some changes there, which we talked about, so that program is going away. We may revisit it, probably will revisit it when we feel like we've got a handle on that. But as of today, we don't. But you know, this number, that number continues to go down. And you know, we've added a lot of staff over the years, particularly through the pandemic. And with good reason. We've had a lot of students that have needed a lot of support. But as we transition away from that, you know, we're going to have to be very deliberate in our staffing, and you know, I'm hoping that we can have some very fearless conversations. And you know, when we see retirements and departures and openings, you know, we need to have some conversation before we just automatically fill those. And I think part of it needs to be, we just need to be very deliberate and intentional about how we allocate our resources. And so I just want to, you know, plant that in everybody's mind that, you know, enrollment, we're not going to grow, we're in great shape, and I'm grateful for that, but we want to make sure that we keep it that way. All right, so we just have to be careful going forward. All right, but for next year, I'm essentially projecting flat with where we are today. But how the blended pupil count works, that will still result in a reduction in our blended pupil count for next year. All right, so you know, that's kind of what we're looking at for right now. But the good news is we're still looking pretty stable as a result of that. Now, fund equity. This is always a hot topic, and I understand, and I'm very happy to have the graph that I have here today. We have had significant growth in our fund equity, which gives us a lot more stability, allows us to make decisions with intention over time rather than knee-jerk, oh, we need to cut $2 million out of the budget. You know, and so, but we have to do that work as we go, or we face the risk down the road of having a big gap that we need to, you know, make cuts very quickly, and you know, that's not good for anybody. It's not good for our staff, it's not good for the community, it's not good for our students. So we just want to be intentional about how we address things going forward. But the good news is our fund equity continues to be very, very strong, both in absolute dollars and percentage terms, stronger than I think it's probably ever been for the district. But we're also, you know, a lot of districts across the state look like this. You know, I think this has been a pretty common experience where districts have been able to, you know, grow their fund balance for a number of years now, and that's going to get a lot more tricky going forward.
It's important though. I mean, I remember in 1983, Governor Milliken, we were 2/3 of the way through the school year, and he did a retroactive to the beginning of the school year, school fund. And we didn't have enough fund equity to handle that right. We did away with all the secretaries in all the buildings. We did away with custodians in the buildings. If you're not prepared, it could be a major crisis. you never know what the crisis is.
Well, the more recent example is if you look from 2008
Exactly.
to 2009, and
Mm-hmm.
we had a big enrollment drop, and that related to changes with Pfizer Pharmacia, I think, and a lot of families moved out of the area. And we were able, because we drew down that fund balance to anxiety-provoking levels,
Yeah,
but it allowed us not to pink slip people by
Yeah.
doing it.
Yep.
And we were able to not switch kids from, we can't have 3 third grades, we're gonna have 2 now. And we
Right.
got a new teacher, and
Yeah.
we didn't do that. And that gives you an even more recent example,
yeah, it's been a number of years, but mid-year prorations, we went through a series of those in the mid-2000s through 2010, 11, and some of them were big, and some of them happened after the last day of school, and so you really don't have, it's not really possible to cut the budget after school's out, at least in any way that's gonna make a difference, so. I always like to say it
Steve,
gives us flexibility, yes.
your drawdown here, the next year is based on projection on what we're gonna get from the state.
Correct.
You said it's potentially conservative, could go either way, but if it is conservative, is there, how much of a swing could we see? I mean,
It's really hard to know looking at the different proposals. When you look at retirement, and Gail or Kevin, jump in at any point if there's anything you want to add or if I misspeak, but it's really hard with the state grant landscape right now to kind of anticipate what's going to happen. I know the governor's proposal is pretty aggressive, and it takes money from the UAL, as I understand it, and that generates a huge amount of savings for the state, like something over 500 million, like 560 million. I think.
maybe?
That could be too. And I believe the governor's proposal kind of takes that money and uses it to fund a bunch of other initiatives. Not even necessarily things that would affect K-12 directly or our funding. And some of the things where I'm not even sure how we would meet, in terms of dramatically increasing the GSRP program or universal K and some of those types of things. Those are great in concept, but from a facility standpoint, it's easier said than done, But I know that, I believe the House and Senate proposals take a different approach with the retirement savings, and they actually reduce the employer's rate. That could be upwards of 7%, which for us would be like 1.1 to 1.2 million of reduced retirement costs. Not Section 147, but that would come out of the employer cost. So that, it's not knowing what those things are gonna look like. If I had to guess, I would say that may be more likely.
Yeah, and I think, every day we hear something kind of different.
Yeah.
So, I agree, there's no clear cut.
And I would say if that doesn't happen, I'd fully expect there to be another new round of grants, and great. We'll just have to take the time and figure out what we're gonna do with them.
Yeah.
But I do think it's gonna change. I'm hoping that the $225 per kid is a little bit conservative. I hope it goes up a little bit more than that. If that retirement change goes through, that's gonna have a dramatic impact on the budget. But if that happens, there's some collective bargaining that would happen and that kind of thing. So those, that'll make for some interesting conversations, right, Kelly?
We're always up for interesting conversations.
I would just like to add too, in the packet, in your packets, the School Equity Caucus did a nice,
Yeah.
write-up regarding the budget and where we're at currently.
Yep.
So if you
So-
get a chance, take a look.
Stay tuned.
it's just, it's hard to know what the grant landscape is gonna look like, and then some of the other things. So there's some big moving parts in this. But, given the condition that we're in, also, it gives me some confidence, you know, that, okay, we can roll with it, you know, and we will. But it's just, that's the best information that we have right now. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, I was just curious that, you know, if it is conservative and it comes back and we get more than the 225, does that, you know, how big of a jump does that do for us? I mean,
Yeah, there are so many assumptions in the budget too, in terms of, you know, what is our final staffing gonna look like? And as we hire, you know, we've had a lot of our hires, you know, for years, it was the norm to bring in somebody, you know, fresh out of college, bachelor, step one, and a lot of, you know, more and more, it's been, you know, master's, step 20 or more. And so we don't necessarily, so it's just, there's a lot of moving parts. You know, energy costs, total, say 600,000. If we have an unusually harsh winter, if there's something crazy that happens, you know, those can go up or down. So it's hard to say at this point, but we try to build it so it's reasonable and conservative based on the best information that we have, and then kind of go from there. But, you know, hopefully we'll see some improvement in both enrollment and state funding levels. But then again, that will, you know, depending on the timing, that would factor into another year's bargaining and everything else. So, does that answer your question,
Yeah.
Ron?
Yep.
All right. Any other questions on fund equity? All right. So I just talked about a couple of risks and uncertainties. Again, you know, we put the budget together, we use our best guess for enrollment, but we don't know what it is. Final state budget, I said especially mentors because of some of that we talked about. Just a lot of unknowns there. And then inflation, you know, we continue on the non-comp, we see some inflation. On the compensation, we see inflation because, you know, I mean, that is, competition for personnel is high, and, you know, we try to stay competitive as well as we can. Longer term, it's the economy, you know, what's gonna happen with inflation. At some point, there's going to be an economic downturn. You know, I think we're already seeing state revenue soften up a little bit, not at a level that's like, you know, causes panic, but at some point, it's just, the business cycle is gonna flip and we're gonna go into recession. I hope that's at least 4 or 5 years down the road. That'd be my ideal scenario, but we just don't know. We have to be prepared. Enrollment, you know, what's gonna happen long-term with enrollment? Demographically, the state's not growing, you know. We see a lot of houses, but people are having fewer kids and they're waiting. You know, Katie and I are an example of that. We had our first kid when I was 40. And you'd think now that my kids are probably in their 30s, but that's not actually the case. But no, one's only 10 years old for God's sake. So, yeah. So, but we're gonna have to see, you know, what happens with all those things. But nothing there that we can't manage. All right. Questions, comments? So then, if not, it would be time, I think, to actually officially hold the budget hearing. And this is where we talk about the 18 mil non-homestead millage, and this is a procedure that we have to go through according to state law and regulations. So there is language in the resolution that's before the board this evening. It says, be it further resolved that to support the proposed budget for fiscal year 24-25, Vicksburg School shall levy its authorized millage rate of 18 mils of ad valorem property taxes on non-homestead property, excluding principal residences, qualified ag, forest, and industrial personal property. And based on our data, we expect that to generate approximately 2.6 million. All all right? And that millage is necessary to support the general operating expenditures of the district. And without doing this hearing, then we would be in a situation where we'd have to collect, we would have to stick with the Headley rollback millage, that's about $500,000 lower than that. And it would be it would be a loss of about $150,000 off the top of my head. And that's important. We so every 5 years or so, we go back to the voters, ask them to support the non-homestead operating millage. That is what creates the pool of those first dollars for our foundation allowance. And because of the Headley amendment, there's if your taxable values rise at faster than the rate of inflation, you have to roll the millage back so that you don't have more than an inflationary increase. And I understand the purpose of that. To me, it doesn't make a lot of sense in the school aid fund, just because the state sets the per pupil funding amount, and in order to receive that, you have to levy your 18 mils. So it just seems a little inefficient and a little bit clunky to have to continually go back for Headley overrides and do all that kind of thing. We're not gaining, it's actually, in the legal language, it's considered a tax increase, but it's necessary in order to collect the full per pupil amount, if that makes sense.
I want to make sure I understand. If we didn't get the 2.6 million, there's additional money we would not get from the state, if I'm understanding you correctly. It's not.
Well, it's so
they expect us to fund that. They expect us to raise that amount, and if we don't,
They don't make it up.
they don't make it up.
okay.
So just using round numbers, if the foundation allowance was $20 million, and if the non-homestead millage would generate $2 million, the state will pay us $18 million.
Okay.
Whether we levy the $2 million or not, it's just a straight formula. They deduct non-homestead taxable value multiplied by 18 mils, and that comes right off what the state pays. So,
Right. Okay.
so if we don't pass it, or community doesn't
Okay.
support it, then we lose that money.
The important thing for everybody to remember when you're talking to friends, family, and everything else, this is non-homestead. So this is not gonna raise your property taxes on your house. And residents are the ones that vote. So you're actually voting to include this, which comes off corporations, industrial buildings, all the things that are not homestead. And a lot of school systems over the years, every now and then you hear about somebody not passing this one.
It still happens.
It
I think
does.
it still happens. I think it happened in one district in May.
Exactly. We all need to remember that, and questions will come up, because unfortunately, like Steve said, we have to call it a rate, an increase. Because if they don't vote for it, it'd go down, which is ludicrous.
Right. It's just time and money, to hold an election every 5 years and explain, it's just, but it is what it is.
It is what it is.
What's the 2.6 based off of, as far as what was previously taxed? I mean, are we have additional businesses in the community that keep coming online? Are we gonna see growth there that actually would make that more favorable?
Well, even if it goes, say there was something magnificent that happened, burst of construction activity, commercial properties, say that went up to $3 million. We would gain nothing from that, really, because then the state would just deduct that from,
Okay, I understand.
all right? But having a healthy tax base, does help when we're talking about, bond issues and that type of thing. So, but our non-homestead taxable value is about $144 million, but our total taxable value, including all the non-homestead, is about $800 million. So it's been going up by a decent amount.
Are you able to control the verbiage on the ballot so it's clear that it's not?
This is just the resolution, and that's standard. But when we go out and sell the millage, we have to just you have to put in easier terms, but the ballot language is, legally, it's very, the attorney has to draft that, it's very, you can't wordsmith that.
And they don't let us make it as simple as it sounds.
Right.
By intent. Okay, because they were trying to keep another segment of the population happy at that time. It's the same reason we have terms like enhancement millage, which sounds like you're putting frosting on the cake. Okay, and sinking fund, which sounds like you're about to shut the doors down and you're really just trying to get support for maybe maintenance facilities or some of those things. But they did those terms back in the early 90s specifically so that it caused people to think and sometimes confuse. We've been fortunate, and I think people have a tendency to understand it, but every now and then, and you'll see some signs around town now where it says, vote no for property tax in Michigan. I'd like to know what they think is going to pay for police, fire, school, and everything else. But it's just important to communicate that when you get a chance, when it gets there, to let them know this is not going on your homeowners. It's going on other things.
Yeah.
Like if we get a big expansion, some industry comes in or something, yeah, we don't necessarily get that increase, but you gotta keep in mind that they're gonna bring residents in, and those are more homesteads and homestead property tax and kids and everything else. So that's where we gain from. And, let's open up the annual public hearing. This is a public hearing for me to make comment or questions. We've been doing, so we'll consider that open. Does anyone have any questions or comments they wish to make?
Well, I have a comment or a question. Non-homestead means this doesn't include the home you live in. If you have other homes in the district, they're taxed. So that needs to be made clear. It isn't just commercial
Yeah, it's
property.
principal residence.
Principal
Residence.
residence. Right,
Not rental property, not a cottage in the lake,
right.
Yep.
So, any other questions or comments?
Well done. Very good.
Thanks, sorry, it always takes longer than I planned for, but
It's okay, you
I
brought
apologize.
cupcakes.
We'll prepare,
You brought cupcakes, it's okay.
Well, but I'll take credit for it.
we'll declare the public hearing closed.
Any other questions or comments? If not, then that will conclude my report. Thank you for your
Thanks, Steve.
patience.
Okay, we'll go on to audience. Do we have anybody in the audience that wishes to address a non-agenda item? Hearing none, we'll go on to board action required. First, approval of following board meeting minutes. May 13th, 2024, the regular meeting, May 29th, 2024, the work session. I'll entertain a motion for both.
So moved.
Moved by Tina,
Second.
supported by Ron. Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Approval of general fund invoices totaling $414,800.74.
So moved.
Moved by Carol, supported by Tina. Discussion? Dan?
Yes.
Dave?
Yes.
Ron?
Yes.
Tina?
Yes.
Carol? And yes, motion carries. Approval of purchase card disbursements for April 2024 totaling $67,668.69.
So moved.
Moved by Dan. Supported by Dave. Discussion? Dan?
Yes.
Dave?
Yes.
Ron?
Yes.
Tina?
Yes.
Carol?
Yes.
And yes, motion carries. Approval of resolution to establish a capital improvement fund in accordance with the requirements of Public Act 10 of 2023, Section 9.2.
Is this just so that we have to have that fund for the bond money coming in?
Yes, and it's a little bit more nuanced than that. The prevailing wage law was reinstated, which at the time we passed the 2020 bonds, the prevailing wage law was not in effect, and so we were not subject to it. Effective, whatever that date was, February 24th, the law was reenacted and became effective. Now, because our bonds are school bond, loan fund qualified, we are subject to prevailing wage. So, but of course, when we did a facility study, when we issued bonds, when we bid contracts, you know, last fall, we were not complying with prevailing wage. So, this resolution establishes a fund where we deposit a fairly nominal amount of local property tax from the non-homestead millage. And as long as a portion of that is used to pay each contract that was entered into after the effective date of the law, then we are not bound by the prevailing wage laws. All right? So, does that,
Okay.
it's, and so, yeah,
It's a legal show.
yeah, and it's all that's put together by the attorneys. It's just that we're in a weird case because we started the bond issue under one set of rules, the rules changed. That's caught up other entities as well, and so the attorneys have identified that this is a legal exception, and so they were, you know, we're passing that, or requesting to pass that so that we can continue with our construction and not have to start from scratch and rebid everything and all that. Realistically, we are probably at or above a prevailing wage anyway, but the record keeping and all that, we don't have, you know, the payroll records and all that to verify it. So this is I would say, protective measure to keep the work getting done without unanticipated financial hit.
Now, does that then change in another year or so, that is no longer, this fund would not be needed and we are paying prevailing wage?
That's a question that I have to get answered before we go out for 2026.
Okay.
And that could have implications for a number of different things. I don't think that, you know, that exception is gonna sunset, essentially. It won't, you know, the next time we go for bonds, that exception won't necessarily be there. So we'll have to look at, do we participate in school bond loan fund, do we not? We'll have to, you know, we'll have to weigh, what does that mean from our access to capital markets and having the state's bond rating versus being bound by prevailing wage. You know, just have to evaluate what's gonna be the most efficient way,
Okay.
if that makes sense.
And things could change in Lansing.
Yeah, right, yeah, we just don't know.
So, okay, well, we need a motion and a support on that.
I'll make the motion.
Moved by Dave. Supported by Dan. Discussion? Dan?
Yes.
Dave?
Yes.
Ron?
Yes.
Tina?
Yes.
Carol?
Yes.
And yes, motion carries. Item E, approval to accept student enrollments through section 105 of Public Act 94 for the first semester of the 24-25 school year.
So moved.
Moved by Tina,
Support.
supported by Carol. Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Approval to amend the 23-24 budgets and adopt the appropriations resolution for the 24-25 budgets for the following funds: general funds, special revenue funds, debt retirement funds, building and site funds, 2022. Entertain a motion.
So moved.
Moved by Tina. Support. Supported by Ron. Discussion.
Steve, we talked briefly about this, but I think it might be helpful because with the food service fund, how that's changed in the last 2 to 3 years.
Yeah,
significantly.
yep, when you see the makeup of revenues, up until last year, we had our normal national school lunch, breakfast, but this year we went to universal paid lunch, so we still have the federal, but we have a much smaller local revenue piece, because every student is able to get free lunch. Now, we still have those local dollars for investment income, but also a la carte sales and that type of thing. But there was just a shift in where we got the revenue. And, does that answer your question, Dave, or do you need to go into more detail?
No, I just, just looking at how the numbers, and I can't find the page either, but, I mean, the numbers numbers changed significantly where you were getting your revenue.
Yeah,
Just the
not,
district
the
wanted to
total
have-
dollars didn't necessarily change
Right.
that much, but it was the source, and the source went from local to state, or, yeah.
Okay, do we have a motion? Okay. All right, Dan?
Yes.
Dave?
Yes.
Ron?
Yes.
Tina?
Yes.
Carol?
Yes.
And yes, motion carries. Approval of truth in budget on the proposed property tax millage rate for 24-25. And again, that's that homestead property tax that we're talking about.
So moved.
Moved by Carol, supported by Ron. Discussion? Dan?
Yes.
Dave?
Yes.
Ron?
Yes.
Tina?
Yes.
Carol? And yes,
Yes.
motion carries. Approval to renew our membership for the Vicksburg High School and Middle School and the Michigan High School Athletic Association from August 1st, 24 to July 31st, 25.
So moved.
Moved by Tina,
Supported.
supported by Dan. Discussion? All, or Dan?
Yes.
Dave?
Yes.
Ron?
Yes.
Tina?
Yes.
Carol?
Yes.
And yes, motion carries. Approval of the bid from Douglas Equipment, the amount of $289,539.80 for new serving lines in all 5 school buildings.
So moved.
Moved by Tina,
Support.
supported by Carol. Any discussion? That sounds like a lot of stuff for that little bit of money. You know, so. Okay, any discussion on that? Okay, Dan?
Yes.
Dave?
Yes.
Ron?
Yes.
Tina?
Yes.
Carol?
Yes.
And yes, motion carries. Approval of tenure for the following teachers, this is a roll call. We'll take teachers A through S.
So moved.
Moved by Carol, supported by Tina. Any discussion? Dan?
Yes.
Dave?
Yes.
Ron?
Yes.
Tina?
Yes.
Carol?
Yes.
And yes, motion carries. Approval of 5th year of 5-year probation for the following teachers. And we have teacher A and teacher B.
So moved.
Moved by Dave,
Support.
supported by Ron. Discussion? Dan?
Yes.
Dave?
Yes.
Ron?
Yes.
Tina?
Yes.
Carol?
Yes.
And yes, motion carries. Approval of 4th year of 5-year probation for the following teachers. And those are A through N.
So moved.
Moved by Tina,
Supported.
supported by Dan. Discussion? Dan?
Yes.
Dave?
Yes.
Ron?
Yes.
Tina?
Yes.
Carol?
Yes.
And yes, motion carries. Approval of 3rd year of 5-year probation for the following teachers, teachers A through F.
So moved.
Moved by Dave,
Support.
supported by Ron. Discussion? Dan?
Yes.
Dave?
Yes.
Ron?
Yes.
Tina?
Yes.
Carol?
Yes.
And yes, motion carries. Approval of 2nd year of 5-year probation for the following teachers. And we take teachers A through D.
So moved.
Moved by Tina,
Yeah.
Support.
supported by Carol. Discussion? Ron? Or
Yes.
Dan?
Yes.
I got this out of order, didn't I? Dave?
Yes.
Ron?
Yes.
Tina?
Yes.
Carol? Yes. That's like trying to write something with your left hand. Approval of the 2nd year for the 2-year probation. And we'll take teachers A, B, and C.
Is the probationary period shorter because these are teachers coming in with significant experience?
Previous tenure.
Yep.
Oh, okay,
Yep.
okay. Thank you.
Yep.
So moved.
Support.
Okay.
Roll call too?
Yeah. Tina, did you
Supported it.
support? Who made the motion?
Dave.
Dave did. Okay. Any discussion? Dan?
Yes.
Dave?
Yes.
Ron?
Yes.
Tina?
Yes.
Carol?
Yes.
And yes, motion carries. Approval of 1st year of 5-year probation for the following teachers. Teachers A through C is noted in the agenda.
So moved.
Moved by Carol,
Support.
supported by Tina. Discussion? Dan?
Yes.
Dave?
Yes.
Ron?
Yes.
Tina?
Yes.
Carol?
Yes.
And yes, motion carries. Approval of retirement of high school, middle school librarian Joe Wing effective June 4th, 2024.
So moved.
Moved by Ron,
Support.
supported by Tina. Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Approval of retirement of pathways teacher Laura Wyckoff. I always butcher this. Laura Wyckoff. What is it?
We're at
Weircock, okay. After 8 years of service. Entertain a motion? Can I still get it?
Yeah. No one knew. You're good.
I'll make the motion that teacher number 17.
Okay,
Support.
do we have a support?
Yes.
Okay. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Too bad, it's somebody you know too. Approval of resignation of high school teacher Bob Verduzco,
got it.
effective June 7th, 2024.
So moved.
Moved by Carol,
Support.
supported by Tina. Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Approve resignation of Sunset Lake Counselor Shana Brooks, effective April 19th, 2024.
So moved.
Moved by Dave, supported by Carol. Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Approve resignation of Pathways teacher Shelley Johnson, effective June 7th, 2024.
So moved.
Moved by Carol, or moved by Tina?
And I'll support it.
Supported by Carol. Discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Approve leave of absence to Sunset Lake teacher Kelly Hillsberg for the 24-25 school year.
So moved.
Moved by Dave,
Support.
supported by Carol. Discussion? All in favor?
Does that absence, did they shut down all benefits and everything during that period of time? What's that entail, a leave of absence?
Yes,
Yeah.
She mentioned that.
yes.
They do forfeit everything then at that time. What do they have to do to come back online? Is there a process that they have to go through? Does that, obviously, it's probably be approved by the board?
Yeah, generally when we accept a leave of absence, that position will be available to them after their leave. So we anticipate Kelly being back with us for the 25-26 school
Okay,
year.
and then for the next year, well, they're out, how do we fill that role then?
We're working on it. I mean, it could be a variety, but most likely someone will come in under contract.
We
Yeah.
actually have it through the check.
The staffing update that's in your folder, when we have our wrap-up, administrative team wrap-up the next 2 days, we're gonna talk some strategy regarding some of the halftime positions we have in the district that are open right now.
Okay.
And that would be related to this. Yep.
All right, thank you.
Whenever we grant a leave of absence, and that's why it has the date or a year, might be 6 months, the birth situation, that's saying how long we'll keep that job open for it to come back.
Sure.
Okay, first reading approval of following Vicksburg Community Schools
You
policy.
guys do your roll call.
Did we do that?
No.
Oh, okay.
I know we did.
It's not a roll call. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Okay, first reading approval of following Vicksburg Community Schools policies, and we'll take policies A through F with the board's permission.
And I support, but I have
Moved
a
by Carol,
question.
supported by Tina. Discussion on any of those.
Oh, yes, I have a question. On a lot example, page 113, the new school construction renovation, for example, a lot of these changes aren't changes.
Yeah, I would.
It says repair, and then the word crossed out is repair. And then it says
A lot of things are that way.
website, and the word crossed out is website. Why did that have to be done?
That is a really good question.
Yeah.
A lot of times it's just formatting.
I think that's more of a grammar, like the repair, they added a
Yeah, I
comma
know, but
after it.
a lot of those is just to cross out one word and put it back in
Oh.
with a different
A
color.
lot.
Without a comma.
In both of those, they added commas in there.
Or
So-
oh, I see, okay.
And sometimes it ends up being just a legalese word, which is not always grammatically correct.
Yeah, again, this is vetted by, I know it seems redundant, but
Yeah, it doesn't.
our legal team, they're gonna
Yeah.
present us with the changes they feel are.
Okay,
Most
that's all.
beneficial.
I've dragged the meeting on a little bit longer.
We'll all hold you responsible. Okay, Dan?
Yes.
Dave? Yes. Ron? Tina?
Yes.
Carol?
Yes.
And yes, motion carries.